Sorry, I got cut off there. I was recording on my phone, and a phone call came in, and it completely cut off my recording. But I stopped there. Severus Snape found Harry and Ron, and that was the last person they would want to find them. And so he, of course, is smug and happy, thinking that they're going to be expelled. And so he goes and gets McGonagall and Dumbledore, and neither of them are happy with Ron and Harry as well. But they are not expelling them at this point. Dumbledore tells Snape to come back to the feast, that it is up to Professor McGonagall what kind of punishment these boys will receive because they are, of course, in her house, Gryffindor. Snape shot a look of pure venom at Harry and Ron as he allowed himself to be swept out of his office, leaving them alone with Professor McGonagall, who was still eyeing them with a wrathful eagle. "You'd better get along to the hospital wing, Weasley. You're bleeding." "Not much," said Ron, hastily wiping the cut over his eye with his sleeve. "Professor, I wanted to watch my sister being sorted." "The sorting ceremony is over," said Professor McGonagall. "Your sister is also in Gryffindor." "Oh, good," said Ron. "And speaking of Gryffindor," Professor McGonagall said sharply, but Harry cut in. "Professor, when we took the car, term hadn't started. So Gryffindor shouldn't really have points taken away from it, shouldn't it?" He finished, watching her anxiously. Professor McGonagall gave him a piercing look, but he was sure she had almost smiled. Her mouth looked less thin, anyway. "I will not take any points from Gryffindor," she said, but Harry's heart lightened considerably. "But you will both get a detention." It was better than Harry expected. As for Dumbledore's writing to the Dursleys, that was nothing. Harry knew perfectly well they'd be just as disappointed that the Whomping Willow hadn't squashed him flat. Professor McGonagall raised her wand again and pointed it at Snape's desk. A large plate of sandwiches, 2 silver goblets, and a jug of iced pumpkin juice appeared with a pop. "You will eat in here and then go straight up to your dormitory," she said. "I must also return to the feast." When the door had closed behind her, Ron let out a long, low whistle. "I thought we'd had it," he said, grabbing a sandwich. "So did I," said Harry, taking one too. "Can you believe our luck, though?" said Ron thickly through a mouthful of chicken and ham. "Fred and George must have flown that car 5 or 6 times, and no muggle ever saw them." He swallowed and took another huge bite. Why couldn't we get through the barrier?" Harry shrugged. "We'll have to watch our step from now on, though," he said, taking a grateful swig of pumpkin juice. "Wish we could have gone up to the feast." "She didn't want us showing off," said Ron eagerly. "Doesn't want people to think it's clever arriving by flying car." When they had eaten as many sandwiches as they could, the plate kept refilling itself, they rose and left the office, treading the familiar path to Gryffindor Tower. The castle was quiet. It seemed that the feast was over. They walked past muttering portraits and creaking suits of armor and climbed narrow flights of stone stairs until at last they reached a passage where the secret entrance to Gryffindor Tower was hidden, behind an oil painting of a very fat woman in a pink silk dress. "Password," she said as they approached. Said Harry. They didn't know the New Year's password, not having met a Gryffindor prefect yet, but help came almost immediately. They heard hurrying feet behind them, and they turned to see Hermione dashing toward them. "There you are! Where have you been?" "The most ridiculous rumors. Someone said you'd been expelled for crashing a flying car." "Well, we haven't been expelled," Harry assured her. "You're not telling me you did fly here," said Hermione, sounding almost as severe as Professor McGonagall. "Skip the lecture," said Ron impatiently, "and tell us the new password." "It's Wattlebird," said Hermione impatiently, "but that's not the point." Her words were cut short, however, as the portrait of the fat lady swung open, and there was a sudden storm of clapping. It looked as though the whole Gryffindor house was still awake, packed into the circular common room, standing on the lopsided tables and squashy armchairs, waiting for them to arrive. Arms reached through the portrait hole to pull Harry and Ron inside, leaving Hermione to scramble in after them. Brilliant, yelled Lee Jordan. Inspired. What an entrance. Flying a car right into the Whomping Willow. People will be talking about it for years. Good for you, said a fifth year to Harry had never spoken to. Someone was patting him on the back as though he'd just won a marathon. Fred and George pushed their way to the front of the crowd and said together, why couldn't we have come in the car, eh? Ron was scarlet in the face, grinning embarrassedly. But Harry could see one person who didn't look happy at all. Percy was visible over the heads of some excited first years, and he seemed to be trying to get near enough to start telling them off. Harry nudged Ron in the ribs and nodded in Percy's direction. Ron got the point at once. Got to get upstairs. Bit tired, he said, and the two of them started pushing their way toward the door on the other side of the room, which led to a spiral staircase in the dormitories. Night, Harry called back to Hermione, who was wearing a scowl just like Percy's. They managed to get to the other side of the common room, still having their backs slapped, and gained the piece of the staircase. They hurried up right to the top, and at last reached the door of their old dormitory, which now had a sign on it saying, Second Years. They entered the familiar circular room with its 5-4 posters hung with red velvet and its high, narrow windows. Their trunks had been brought up for them and stood at the ends of their bed. Harry grinned guiltily at Harry. I know I shouldn't have enjoyed that or anything, but the dormitory door flung open, and in came the other second-year Gryffindor boys, Seamus Finnegan, Dean Thomas, and Neville Longbottom. Unbelievable, beamed Seamus. Cool, said Dean. Amazing, said Neville, awestruck. Harry couldn't help it. He grinned, too. All right, so that is the end of Chapter 5. And, of course, they were in trouble by the teachers and the prefects, and even Hermione, who's a rule follower, did not approve of their entrance into Hogwarts. But as you can imagine, most of the other students thought that it was a very cool thing for them to do. And so they're like, yeah, we know we shouldn't be bragging about this, but it is kind of cool that we flew the car into the school. So, they've always been borderline rule breakers, even though they're good kids. They skate along the outside of the rules. They do bad things for good reasons, I guess is a good way to put it. All right. I'm going to stop there for today. Sorry again about cutting off and having to separate this chapter into two videos, but I hope that some of you are at least listening to this and enjoying. If you would, shoot me an email or send me some type of message to let me know that you guys are listening and enjoying it, and I'm not just reading this to myself for no reason. Chapter 6 I will get posted as soon as possible. It is entitled Gilderoy Lockhart. So they will get into their classes, and the second year will really kick off. All right. Hope you're all staying healthy, and I'll see you soon.